Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Polly Papsador from PMG, and welcome to our latest training. This is actually our 5th training and our 3rd MMI direct data processing training. So before we get started, just know that all of these trainings are available on demand, so you can view them afterwards. And we just ask that if you'd like, you can have your camera off if you want to eat your lunch while you're viewing the presentation. And also, if you could put yourselves on mute, that would be great. And if you have any questions, just because we have such a large group today, please put them in the chat. And John Bell of MMI Direct, who many of you know, will be monitoring the chat, and he'll be collaborating with Marvin Dawson on the presentation. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, thank you all for joining us, and it is my great pleasure right now to introduce Marvin Dawson. So Marvin, would you like to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks, Polly. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see a lot of familiar names and faces from the cameras and all, and glad you could join us this afternoon. And we're going to be talking about the Merge Purge reports and the demystification of those, which sounds a little unusual, but that's what we're going to talk about today. So I welcome everybody, and what we're kind of going to go through as well is, just so everybody gets a good understanding of all the various reports that are provided during the course of an acquisition merge. Learn how to look for various things that may be red flags and different types of counts or percentages that might raise some questions. Go through and look at all the various information that's provided, how you could use that.
All right. Okay. So
sorry, I just heard a lot of stuff in the background. Sorry about that. So what, go through a lot of the various reports that are produced, make sure everybody has a clear understanding of that, how you can utilize that to help you with future campaigns. And also, how to, review it with others within your team, other providers, so that you can make, good business decisions on on the process itself. So we'll do that. We'll kind of go through all of that. And then at the end, if there's any additional questions, I feel free to ask questions through the chat as we're going along, and I will do my best to answer those as we move through this.
Hello, Marvin. This is Valerie from CDR. You may have already covered this. Will the deck and the recording be available to us after this meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Polly, do you want to address that?
Sure. Now that we have more people joining us, welcome everyone. I know a lot of people just joined. Absolutely. After the presentation, we will be supplying a number of resources, including the deck, and a recording will be available on YouTube, and we'll also have a checklist for you and a course certificate showing your completion of the course. So all of those things will be coming later this week. And keep in mind too that we're going to be showing a lot of reports that have a lot of small text and numbers, and on the PDF you can definitely enlarge all of that information if you want to study it carefully afterwards. So
thanks, Polly. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. So first report we're going to take a look at is the list of lists, and how this gets created is when an acquisition job gets started, then one of the very first things that is provided to your service provider is a list of all the various files that are going to go into the process. Any outside list, rentals, exchanges, house lists, such as, reactivation lapse, suppression files, all of that data and all of those various files would be listed here and assigned a code, a description, breaks down by segment, and then an expected quantity, and that's how it basically starts. And so then all of that is built initially where the broker will normally provide this information to us which we will build the list of lists from. Sometimes the broker may not have all of the various house files that need to be included. So depending on that, those could be provided through other sources other than your list broker that get added to the list of lists. And so as files are coming in, then the list of lists gets updated with the date that the file was received and the quantity that it indicated within the email that said, you know, this file has been emailed to you or is on your FTP site. This is the file name. This is the quantity. Record layout is provided with the data file, so on and so forth. And so we'll take that information and enter that into the list of lists. And then once the file is converted, then the conversion counts in terms of what was input to the conversion, what was output of the conversion, and then if any records were rejected, appear on this report. And this report is used to validate that all the files that came in with the expected quantity in terms of what was ordered. If there's any variations in that, normally what we will do on the list of lists is we will bold the line that would indicate that the expected quantity and the quantity delivered was outside a certain percentage, like 5 or 10%. And we're looking for those types of things and all lists to be verified and validated prior to proceeding into the next step. But this is where it all begins. This is where the data all comes from, all the various sources and all that's going to feed into the acquisition process. Okay. So the data hygiene reports, list hygiene report, which is a statistical report that will provide you information in terms of quantities and match rates to certain things. List processing report is a report that reflects what did we drop based on whatever your business rules are in terms of what you want to mail or what you don't want to mail, records that you want to reject. And the list processing report will break that down into all the various categories in terms of records dropped prior to the merge purge, which is doing all the unduplication and getting rid of the duplicates or dropping matches to the suppression files, so on and so forth. So we'll kind of go through these reports. We'll tell you a couple of stories about some things that have happened that we've noticed within files and things to be looking at, and so that you have a good understanding. And so if you see something, especially if your service provider has not brought it to your attention and it raises a question in your mind, then you can reach out and talk about it and understand what, you know, what happened. Why did the statistics that's on this particular file come about that way? What about that could have created either potential errors or problems or something of that nature? So Polly, if we can go on to the reports, that'd be great. So this is the list hygiene report. And basically what this is all of the lists that appeared on the list of lists that were received have gone through some sort of data hygiene. And so this is statistical information that will show you in this report, basically the files have gone through NCOA and PCOA, which is proprietary change of address. Part of NCOA, you get CAS certification, which does ZIP+4 append, does zip code correction. Part of the PCOA process does apartment number append and correction as well. And so this at an individual list level will give you statistical information. As an example, my input quantity for a particular list. This should equal exactly what came out of the conversion process. So whatever the output on your list of lists should be reflected as your input into your data in your list hygiene process. Records that had a ZIP+4 appended. One thing that that we look for are low hit rates that might point you to an issue relating to the list itself or potentially the process that it's gone through prior to the data hygiene. And so ZIP+4 append rates, which is strictly based on address data, has nothing to do with the name, tells you how many records got a ZIP+4 and the delivery point barcode appended to it, which is a requirement along with NCOA to get automated postal discounts. So one of the things that we look for are low hit rates. And usually what we'll see, especially under most of the outside lists that you're renting or have exchange relationships with, you're going to see under most circumstances, 98 to 100% zip plus 4 hit rates because they're maintained very well. They're out there on the market, so you're not going to have a lot of variations of bad data normally within those types of files because they're being maintained and cleaned up. Where I will see lower hit rates relates to house files in a lot of cases. Reactivation names in terms of lapsed files that have maybe been sitting there, you're going to try to reactivate, let's say you're 48 plus month, you haven't done anything with the data, you haven't invested in doing any type of hygiene because you're not mailing them that frequently, and you're going to do that hygiene during your normal acquisition merge process. So you might, they haven't been maintained as well, so you may see some lower hit rates there on those types of files. One thing, files that are maintained or created through people entering information over the web. Lots of times I notice a lot of lower hit rates on files such as that because lots of times people will not enter in their correct address or information, but they're entering in other information online. Bad data suppression files, lots of times we'll see lower hit rates with files like that, but understanding that and knowing that, and so that you can anticipate that going forward, it's something that if it's the first time out of the box, then you look at those things and you want to try to get a good understanding of why did I only have 80% zip plus 4 on this particular suppression file? Well, let's say there was a lot of data that came in that only had names. You may be maintaining some files, data is being gathered, but you've only gotten the name, you haven't got the address, and that's entered into the file for some reason. Somebody called and complained, but didn't give you complete address data, but they still end up on the file. And so those things will, end up at your service bureau, will go through the hygiene process, and then it will be determined that there's no address data. So it's not going to necessarily feed in and survive any of the merge processing because there's no address to match on. Zip code correction, same type of thing. Made a determination that the zip code provided was incorrect and we corrected it. These are usually very low percentages, but if you saw a high percentage, then if we saw a high percentage in something like that, that could mean potentially did we not pick up the correct field for the zip code. We were able to correct it, but the zip code data was not accurate, but based on the street address and the city and the state, the CAS certification software was able to determine what the correct zip code was, and it corrected it. Or there were just a lot of records on the file that were blank in the zip code field, but had address data. Those could be fixed. And so you may, see that, but when you see those types of higher numbers, again, raises the question, why is that the case? And we're doing the same thing as we're looking at the reports and the data so that we can provide feedback that basically said, you sent us 5,000 names on this last reactivation file, but only half the records had an address and a city, state, and zip. So I just want you to know that the file provided did not have a lot of valid data so that you can take that information back to where the file was maintained, see if there's something that went amiss there, or if that's just the way the data is, that type of thing. NCOA hit rates, records with new address, records moves without a new address, moved out of the country, did not provide a new address when they filled out the change of address with the Postal Service, that type of thing. The things that we look for here, there's two different things. One is no matches at all. It's extremely unusual not to have any matches to the NCOA database or somebody to move. The only time that might potentially happen where it would be valid is if the file provided to us went through NCOA yesterday, and then we got the data, converted it, and we sent it through NCOA, tomorrow, that type of thing. But understanding that and knowing it and looking back at the data to make sure that everything that was processed correctly that would explain it, or going back and to the people that provided it, might be necessary to understand why I didn't get any hits. The other thing, if you feel like that I had no hits on NCOA, but I had a lot of hits on PCOA, at least from that perspective, that would tell me that the name and address data that is provided is getting other types of matches within PCOA, which would make me feel more comfortable with the fact that the name and address data does agree with one another. It's just the file, like I said, had been through NCOA a lot, and very recent. And that would explain a low hit rate there.
Marvin?
Yes.
Excuse me, but Krista has a question for you.
Yes. Hi, Krista.
Hi, Marvin. We kind of talked about this the last time you did a webinar about kind of the temporary moves, but have you seen more kind of from this great move that potentially happened over the last year and a half, higher rates, especially because we're coming into more of like acquisition season? Like, should we be more aware of like a higher NCOA rate or PCO rate so that we're not like red flagging things?
Yes, that's a great question, Krista, and you're absolutely right. With a lot more activity with people moving, and not necessarily temporary moves, but permanent moves, and they're moving, and so higher hit rates would be something that could very well be expected in regards to both NCOA and PCOA as well. But I would expect that you would see that. From the standpoint, unless you're mailing geographically, it won't necessarily have a large effect in regards to records that won't survive the process. But if you are mailing only to certain geographic areas, then you may want to take into consideration, I may have more people that move outside the area that I'm mailing into. And we're not talking huge percentages in regards to that, but you might see an uptick of 1-2% versus what you might have seen a couple of years ago, that type of thing, or even, the last 12 months.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So no matches, something to look for, and then high match rates is another. Now, high match rates on old lapse files, reactivation names, I fully expect. I see anywhere from 10 to 30% on some of these files of reactivation names where we will get high NCOA hit rates on those. But in terms of a high hit rate on an exchange file or a rented file would be fairly unusual. And one of the things that you would be on the lookout for is if you ordered a list that was 0 to 3 months, and you looked at that and you had a 10% hit rate on NCOA, I'd be scratching my head about that, thinking, did that select really get pulled correctly? Could I have pulled a file of people that have responded to this particular list in the last 30 days or 60 days, and 10% of the file moved? That's kind of a red flag to look at. And that's not necessarily something that's going to stop the process. It's something to look at and make a determination on, but it also might be something you would go back to and double check to make sure, yes, the list was pulled correctly. Why were the hit rates so high? And if it's an astronomical amount or something like that, you might be able to get some deductions or something of that nature, especially if it created additional drops from your files because of that. But those are the types of things to see. An example of, something frightening that happens that I've seen within files is we got a file in once and we were running it through the NCOA process and we got 0 hits. And we go back and we're looking at the data and everything looks fine. I mean, the address data matches up. We even Googled some of the addresses. They match to the zip code and the city that they lived in, but we got 0 hit rates. So we started investigating and we went back and we were looking at where the file came from, and we sent an email, and what had turned out to happen is we received the file in an Excel spreadsheet. Before the file came to us, they were doing some QC on the other end before they sent it to us. They highlighted the spreadsheet to sort it so they could look at different things. The problem was they did not highlight all of the various columns on the spreadsheet. So when it got resorted, the name and address got mismatched to one another. And so the name on the file that we got did not match to the address that it would have been. And fortunately, we saw the 0 hit rates on the NCOA, so it was something that could be addressed. The other thing that you would see there as well is you'd probably get no matches in the merge purge if you're doing a name and address match, because that file, the names did not go with address, so it's not going to match any other file at that name and address. So that's another thing to kind of follow it through the process. If you see a list that has an issue relating to something that would concern you or raises a red flag, you can follow that through the other reports to see if that same issue still exists. Okay. Any questions on the list hygiene report in regards to this? Then we'll move forward. So the next report we're going to take a look at is the list processing report. And Polly, when you get a chance, if it'll.
I did. You're not seeing it?
No, I'm just still seeing the list hygiene report.
Okay.
There we go. All right, list processing report. So this report right here basically breaks down all of the different drops that you may be doing prior to the merge. And each one of these categories is identified through a various hygiene process. So as an example, deceased rejects. Those are identified based on matching to deceased databases that are compiled primarily through Social Security Administration records, but are also compiled through other sources as well. But the Social Security Administration is probably the biggest contributor. So you're matching to these databases, and so that's a hygiene process. And so we can give you a breakdown of how many records by list fell into the deceased category. NCOA undeliverables, people that moved with no forwarding address. DMA Panda rejects, people that have matched to the DMA do not solicit file, people that have contacted and indicated they did not want to receive it appear on this file. And so you got to match to those, a breakdown. A prison file, any, profanity, buzzword reject file, that type of thing. All of these different categories are identified through other hygiene processes. And the things that to look for here are high numbers in regards to high percentages of drops that you wouldn't necessarily think that you would normally have. Normally what I see overall in a standard acquisition is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 7% of the records, and not necessarily at each individual list, but overall, especially if you're including some lapsed reactivation names, will drop based on all these different types of variations. The other thing you can do by looking at this is you can look at some of these numbers and make determinations. You made a determination a while back that you do not want to mail to non-ZIP +4 records. So you're going to drop those, let's say, because it didn't get a ZIP +4 appended, and you don't get an automated discount. But I would never make the statement that just because it doesn't have a ZIP +4 doesn't mean that it won't get delivered. It's just less likely to get delivered than if it had a ZIP +4 and the delivery point barcode. So are there numbers enough there that you can test your theory in regards to, well, I determined a while back that I shouldn't mail non-ZIP +4 records. Maybe I'll mail them this time, code them, and see how they respond. Same thing with deceased rejects, things of that. Maybe, you've tested it a while back, but then you made a determination, well, I'm going to, do something else with the deceased. So I want to test and see if they, if that still makes sense in regards to having that as part of my hygiene process. I will tell you, deceased people do respond, and there's many examples of this. And if you were on the last training session that I did, I think I told the same story where a deceased a contributor to an organization, the woman had passed away. Her brother was in her home going through some of her stuff and noticed how, a lot of literature about this organization, and started doing some research and had received a current piece that had been delivered. And so researched what his sister was doing, why she was so passionate about this organization. Bottom line, he contributed $5 million to this organization in his sister's name. and all. So now that is an extremely unusual situation for that to happen, but things like that can happen. And that's why I'm always a proponent of testing your theories based on the fact of, yes, I want to, continue to do certain processes and certain rejects that I don't want to mail, just to make sure that it still makes sense not, to continue to do that and do that going forward. All right, so like I said, this report right here, along with the statistics that go into the merge purge process, and we'll look at this report later, but this is what feeds into the broker report, the report that will go to your list broker. Not necessarily, most of these categories that are listed here would be deductible. Maybe some aren't, maybe some, maybe all of them are, but this gives your broker a breakdown of all the various rejects that have happened from the receipt of the data up until the merge, so that they can see what various categories records are getting dropped for names that are being ordered, being rented, or exchanged for. Okay. So the merge purge process. So we've gone through all the hygiene. So here's a list of various reports that happen during and after the merge process. And we're going to briefly go through and discuss each one of these. Okay, the merge purge summary report. This report gives you a breakdown. Again, everything's broken down by list. And so it'll show you what the input to the merge is, what survived the hygiene process. So that list processing report, what it showed was output out of the hygiene process should be input into the merge purge process. So it will reflect all of this. This will show you all your suppression files, your mailing records, categories that records drop based on files that they match. So you'll see merge purge input, multi-buyer drops. Multi-buyer drops are records that match to other mailable lists that did not match to a suppression file. Single drops are records that matched internally to that list and that list alone and did not match to any other outside list, mailable list, or suppression file. And then you have your suppression file drops. The hierarchy here is, because a record could fall into all three categories. So the hierarchy is in terms of how it's counted in this report: suppression files priority 1, multi-buyer drops 2, single buyer drops 3. So as an example, you could have a one list of 5,000 names that had 3,000 duplicates within itself. But let's say those 3,000 duplicates were also on other lists and also on the suppression files. So you'd see a low count in the single drops, and most of the counts would be in the multis and the suppression drops. So understanding the relationship that list had to itself across all the other lists, you don't necessarily get at this report. It counts the records based on the category. And then you have your single buyer output, multi-buyer output, and then your total output, which, are all the records combined that survive merge. The merge process can be done at any various, criteria in terms of individual type merge, household merge, resident merge, all of those, the matching. So at an individual level, you would see less drops normally. At a household level, you'd see a few more. And then if you're only matching at the address and you don't care about the name, you'll see even higher quantities. The thing about it here is looking at it, I know, lots of times and been doing this for many years and providing these reports, and the main thing people look at seem to be, what's my bottom line total? What did I net out? I've got, do I have the quantity that I want to mail? But digging into the individual list level is something you and your broker and your your data provider should be looking at as well, so that you can see what's happening in the process and understanding that. And your brokers are studying these reports all the time and make so that they can make recommendations to the mailer to make the right business decision as far as that is concerned. So the information here, again, at the list level, can shed a lot of light in regards to what to expect. It's just like, you know, you have your various priorities in terms of records retained in the merge based on who it matches. So, you know, you might see here on this report, high percentage rate up at the top because these are the house reactivation names, because they're going to have a higher priority over the outside lists that are going to be coming in. So you may find the outside list dropping at a higher rate, especially if you have a lot of reactivation names going into your job, versus if you didn't have any, then that interaction would look completely different when it's strictly the rented list against the rented list with no reactivation names at all. Again, what I mentioned about the types of merge and, you know, allow, you know, the household, individual, resident. The other thing too is, what do I consider to be a duplicate? How am I looking at strict matches where, you know, name and address has got to be exact before I consider it a duplicate? Will I allow for different variations within the name and address? Will I allow for a lot more variations? And this kind of lays that out, and you can do this differently, you know, based on the matching to various list categories. So as an example, when I'm matching to I've got a suppression file that is major donors, $10,000 plus donors. So that file, I am going to do everything possible to ensure that not any major donor receives an acquisition piece asking them for $25. So I may allow for a lot more variations when I'm comparing that list to all of the mailable lists, in which I would refer to as a little bit of overkill, just to ensure that those don't get through. Whereas when I'm matching my rented list to rented list, I might allow for slight variations within that, kind of the medium category, that type of thing. But again, these are the types of conversations and understanding of the files, what they're made up of, what you want to, you know, do with them, how they should match to one another, and have those conversations with your broker and your provider so that you're getting the results that you're looking for. The match analysis report. This is a great report, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about within the Merge Purge report itself, where, you know, it shows you where it dropped based on the category and based on the hierarchy. This report will show you how they match to one another. So you'll see in this, you know, little box out here, there's two lists that matched each other at 58%. So 58% of the names that were on list 10, which was the $10 plus list for the last 24 months, were also on the list that was the last 24 months, the $0 to $5 file. So major overlap between those two files, and they're also two of the same file with just a different select. That's a little bit of a red flag in regards to, was the file, you know, when the file was pulled, you would anticipate that the list would be maintained at the same place. So did I omit one order over the other when it was created? And so when you see things like this and you're having conversations with your broker, this is where you might point to the fact, well, I don't want to have to pay for all those duplicate names within the same list. And this is information that will tell you what those percentages are. There's also another tab on this report that actually gives you quantities. And this shows, you know, the number of matches. A big red flag would be if I got 100% match. And I've seen that happen before, and it's happened it happens a couple of different ways. One is we've had the same file provided to us twice for two different lists, and going back and looking at it. The other, a mistake was made when the file was logged in, and the same file was logged in twice for two different lists, and another list, and the file that came in for the list that was misidentified did not get logged in at all. So we go through all the process, we get through the merge, we see 100% match, we go back, we investigate, we determine the mistake that we made, we fix that, we rerun everything, and that problem goes away. So this is something from the you know, we and your providers are always looking at to see what those relationships are. You'll also, and I'm sure you all know this already, but there's a lot of overlap between all the various co-op lists. Wyland, Abacus, DonorBase, all of those various co-op files, you will see usually somewhere between, I'd say, 15 to 25% overlap between the two, different models and things like that. And that makes all the sense in the world because these files and modeling are being created a lot from, you know, a lot of the same names are feeding into these databases, these co-ops, which would create these overlaps. And so do they necessarily tier one with one match that same with tier one for another, or is it tier one, tier two? It varies, but you will see that those types of relationships in these reports. Multi-buyer summary report, a breakdown at the list level of all your multi-buyers and what category they fall into. 2-time only, 3-time only, 4-time, so on and so forth, up to 9-time plus. So brief explanation, a 2-time multi is a name that was on just 2 separate lists. 3 was on 3 lists, so on and so forth. Your 9-time plus were on 9 or more different lists and was flagged as a multi-buyer. And these are the name that was retained at what list. So as an example, the first list listed there at 3952 multi-buyers, 1787 were 2-time only. So they were retained on this list and matched, of those 1787 matched to one other list as well, and only one other list. Okay. This is the broker report. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where you kind of brings in the list processing report along with the merge purge report to create the broker report. And this will show from beginning to net out of merge, what went in, where we dropped all the records, and what survived. And in the various categories, like in the merge purge, the single buyer output, multi-buyer output, and all, and then the percentage kept. This is what your broker uses to do billing from. This is a lot of information. Like I indicated, some of these categories may be deductible, some may not. Those are conversations that you would have with your list broker about those in regards to that. Excuse me. There's a lot. Other types of categories that could be added to this. Let's say you're only mailing into certain geographic areas, then, you know, another column that would say, you know, outside those geographic areas, records that we drop because you're only mailing into, let's say, you know, the Northeast or something of that nature. And so any records that fall outside of those states would be dropped, and that would be another category here. And we try to identify and all the various categories so they're kind of not all lumped into one. Whereas, you know, previously, cash rejects, non-zip +4s, vacant lots, a lot of that kind of stuff could fall into the same category. As we've gotten more sophisticated and able to categorize and break these things apart, we try to break them apart into all these different categories and any other categories that you might like to see based on the, you know, the rejects that you're doing. Okay. So we're through the merge, we're ready to do all the segmentation, creating all the various package splits and all, and this is an example of that report that will show you the package, the source code that was assigned, what list name and select is associated with that package and that source code. As you notice, this particular report, the source code does not necessarily correlate back to the file code that was on your list hygiene report, your merge purge reports, all of those. They've been translated and converted to these source codes based on that particular segmentation documentation and what's being requested. So having the description and the selection alongside the source code kind of gives you an idea of what all of those are, the quantities in terms of the breakdown. As you would see, if you saw this entire report, packages A and B looks like to me is like an A-B split, because I can see the quantity for source, the first source code, when then each one has the same quantity. And so it's going to be, you know, a split 50-50. It's going to be geographically split as well, along with representation of multi-buyers and things like that, so that they truly mirror one another at the list level and at the entire package level, so that when you're, you know, doing, you know, checking your results in regards to that, you can know if this is the way you set up the splits, that my control package A and my test package B mirror one another, and I can, you know, look at the results and compare them appropriately. And this is the type of thing that you would want to be looking at to make sure that were my instructions followed, were the source codes that I gave assigned properly, or my counts coming out the way that I want to at an individual list level and at the overall package count. Okay, as we talked about how to, you know, we've looked at all the reports and everything that's been created. So understand, you know, back again, understanding the information that you've got and not just looking at a bottom line number is extremely important in being able to talk to, have conversations with, and discuss the results with your broker, with your data provider internally, to make sure that everything is being processed and done as you would anticipate. You're looking for the various anomalies. You're trying to make sure that everything that you expected happened, and that if it didn't, you're talking about those, you're asking those questions. You know, there's never a dumb question when it comes to looking at this stuff, to make sure that you have a complete understanding of what transpired, why the results came out the way that they did, and what could I expect if I did something a little bit different. If I went from a household merge to an individual merge, what kind of effect could that have with me? Have conversations with your broker, with your data provider. We do these types of things all the time. We could probably share those types of information with you. What are the statistics that I should expect, you know, for deceased drops? You know, what I see is anywhere, depending on the list, again, is usually 1 to 4 to 5% of a file could fall into the deceased category, depending on how well maintained the file is. So understanding that and knowing that, so that as you're developing your plan and you're putting it all together, that, you know, when everything is done and the results are finished, it's what you would have expected. It didn't come out different.
If I could just add something real quick, Marvin,
Sure,
and
John.
terminology between providers can be different. So always ask for the, you know, the description, the report descriptions, and what the columns actually mean. Get that up front when you process your first job, so there is no miscommunication down the road, or something you assume means one thing can actually mean something different.
Very true. Very true. Good point, John. You know, and I can't stress enough, and we, you know, we talk about this a lot in terms of bringing all your providers together and having a conversation. You know, not just at the beginning of when you first start working with somebody, but just, you know, at least once a year, maybe twice a year, bring everybody together. Let's talk about what's going on. Are there any things that we should be doing that we're not doing? Are there things that we should be testing that we're not testing? And not just, you know, not just in creative and not just necessarily in list, but in processes as well. There are certain things that you have to do because the Postal Service requires it if you want to get any type of automated discounts. But there's other processes and there's other things that you can do that you make a business decision on based on your results and based on conversations and based on what you're seeing within the data and within the statistics that come out of the various process. Use that information, talk to others about it so that you can get a sense of, you know, again, what should I be doing? What should I be testing? What's out there that I haven't done before? Or is there anything new that I should be looking at in regards to that? You know, A great question came up to me the other day relating to post-merge files and what should I be doing with post-merge files that are being created after the merge is done. So what you're doing is, and I'm sure a lot of y'all are doing this, is you get through the merge, but then you're going to use some of the co-ops. You're going to use, Abacus, Donabase, Wyland, all the others that are out there, and you may be ordering additional names to be fed into the segmentation. So when those additional names are provided, what should I do? Should I just take those names, convert them, run them through, CAT? Have they already been through NCOA? Do you know how frequently that's happened with the files that are being provided? Should I be running all of the same hygiene processes that I did for all the pre-merge files that come in? Should I do those same things on the post-merge files? If you're doing those, then you need to understand is you are going to drop records from those post-merge files before they get added back in. Normally what's provided is the mailing file out of the merge and the suppression file out of the merge that go to the co-op so that they can eliminate those names from the records that they're providing you to be added back into the merge. So in theory, there should not be any duplication. But the merge logic that you're doing in your standard merge is not necessarily the same logic that's being done on the post-merge files before they're provided. So it's potential, those files are deduped at an individual level. You're doing a household level merge. So could there still be households that were in the suppression file that would match to the post-merge files that I should match back up against? Or is that being done? Do you know? Are those questions being asked? And that's why, I say, knowing what's being done and what's being brought in and then what you're doing from that perspective afterwards is very important in regards to, what's getting mailed. What I can tell you, and I've seen it a lot of different ways. I've seen post-merge files come in, they get CAS certified, they've been indicated that those names have been through NCOA in the last 95 days. They get added to the merge, they get splits, they get mailed, and then 2 months later, I get a phone call or an email that says this person got mailed in this acquisition and they're on the suppression file. How did they get mailed? You go back and look at it. Well, they were on the suppression file. Potentially something happened in that process in the suppression, or it was just a different individual within the household that got it. It wasn't the same name, the same household, that type of thing. Things happen. So doing NCOA, deceased, I have some clients that do the whole gamut. Take my post-merge files, run it through everything, add it to the net out of the merge purge. I have others that do maybe just NCOA and drop the NCOA on deliverables, but don't do deceased or vacant lots or other types of name rejects, things of that nature that you might not want to mail to. Because there may be names on the file that have no individual name but have a company name, but you really don't want to mail to records that are company names only. So understanding that and knowing what you're receiving will drive your decision on what types of processes should be done to those records prior to being added into the net out of the merge and going into your segmentation. I will say that the co-ops do a fantastic job in putting all this data together, but just like us, nobody's infallible. Mistakes can happen. And by doing some of these hygiene processes, all you're basically doing is applying the same rules that you're applying to the post-merge names as you're applying to the pre-merge names. So it's something to, talk about, consider, discuss with your broker so that you can come up with the best decision and it's going, and give you the best results in terms of what you're going to mail. I just warn you, always, depending on what you do, recognize the fact that the names that you order and the names that might survive to go in will be less based on more hygiene processes that you do. Okay. Okay, pro tips from Marvin. As we talked about earlier, drastic differences, having an understanding of what's what history has told you about your process. So let's say you mail monthly, and every month, 6 of those months, you're wanting to mail 500,000 names, and your normal retention rate is 75%. But when you do, in your other 6 months, you're mailing less, and your retention rates might be 85%, because you've got less quantity going in, so you might find fewer duplication based on that. Or you may be bringing in more test lists into the equation that may not match to the other list of the suppression file at as high rate as what your others do. So understanding what history tells you about your process, and again, discussing it with your broker and your provider and everything to make sure that when you're developing your mail plan and what you're putting into it, you have a good understanding of what to expect on the back end. Excuse me. I'm a big proponent of getting all of your providers together and having conversations and understanding everybody's role in the process, and so that you can participate and add to the conversation and ask questions, and everybody comes together as full partners. And again, it's just so important to collaborate with one another, even, not necessarily your providers, but others in the industry. What are y'all doing? What are other people doing that is, they're finding successful that maybe help my program as well? Be a participant, participate with other people, share knowledge, provide knowledge, take knowledge in. It's all going to work out and be the best for you in the long run, and the best for what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve for your organization.
And if I could just add something real quick to that, and I think Marvin will back me up on this, but I don't think we have ever been involved in a vendor partner meeting that we have not come out with additional efficiencies that we could build into the process. It's just an outgrowth of conversation and hearing how people deal with the files, how the files are formatted, what they need to do. And it's just having the input and having the general conversation itself breeds efficiencies.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, John. It's always beneficial. We learn so much more ourselves. And, I've been doing this since 1975. And anytime I'm talking to somebody about processes or what they're doing or anything like that, I always learn something new. And in most cases, I can take that back and incorporate it into some of the stuff that we do as well to provide, additional value.
That's fantastic.
All right.
Thank you, Marvin.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time, and don't hesitate to reach out to me individually if you have other questions that, after we get done here today as well.
And if I might add in also, if there are any topics that you would like for us to address, please bring them up. We're an open book, and we can put these together to help you in any way we can within the data hygiene, processing, PMG, any of the divisions within PMG, all accessible to hold additional training.
Definitely. We've got 5 so far, so we're on a roll, and we definitely want to get input from our audience. So thank you. Just to recap the resources that you will be getting very soon. So you will get this deck. You will also get a checklist about acquisition, merge, purge reports. You will get a fun certificate of course completion that has a little one of these little Marvin characters on it. So it's probably your most fun course certificate you'll ever get. And then just on the next slide here, here's just a list of all of the online trainings that we have that are now the recordings are available on our YouTube channel on demand, and these can be accessed through our websites too. So here's the different topics that we've already covered. So with that,
You have another question?
Yeah. Krista, you have a couple of questions?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to make people stay on them, so I just figured I'd ask if you just had a minute when you're done saying goodbye.
Well, we ended early, so plenty of time.
so why don't you just go ahead? People can sign off if they want, or they can hang on and listen to your question. So thank you.
So my first question is, that's the first time I've really seen all the lists of the different flags. I mean, I know we've talked in the past about the deceased like flagging, but all those other ones, that's really interesting. And I hate to almost bring this up. I feel like Ross may kill me, but maybe it's just because the Meals on Wheels co-op, where we're dealing with a bunch of cities, it's not broken out like that so well because it's just so much information. But if I wanted to, should I just ask Ross, like, can you outline some of those that maybe have some interest to me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And then my other question would be in regards to a topic potentially moving forward. You'd mentioned before, I like some of these interesting things about how to handle multis that are dual household multis, spouses or partners, whoever. And I like the idea of the test you had said, where drop one would be maybe under the wife and drop two would be maybe under the husband.
Yep.
I'd love to hear more kind of testing ideas of how to kind of play with some of the stuff with multis and different ideas like that. I think that was an incredibly great test idea, and we're already going to start implementing that. So
yes, yeah, I mean that process with the second in household with the multis and doing that, like I said, you know, you'll usually what I have seen is anywhere from like 10 to 20% of the names of multis might be a different individual within the household. Not a huge percentage, but it's definitely something that you can look at and test as well.
Yeah, I think there's just, you know, I think especially nowadays where there's so much like kind of maybe some controversy about, you know, of more personalization type of things and who we're picking over people. So, you know, maybe it's a feel-good thing for both people to be getting a piece of mailing, and then also just, you know, if that's able to be like a whole topic in the future, I'd love to hear more testing ideas that you guys have, because I think that's
great.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right.
Great questions.
Yes, definitely. And Krista, so the data hygiene and the Purge trainings go into, at least briefly, some of those testing ideas, but absolutely Marvin and Ross can go into greater detail too, just one-on-one.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're gonna sign off then now with 3 minutes to spare. So thank you again, Marvin and John, and everyone who attended. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time today.